Thank you so much to ADL for giving me the opportunity to represent the McCain Institute today. Thank you to Jonathan Goldblatt, to George Salim, Oren Segal, and all of our partners. The relationship between the McCain Institute, which is an institute that's only 10 years old, dates back to 2019. And we believe it's fitting that the McCain Institute works with ADL, a leading national organization in fostering peace and national dialogue, combating anti-Semitism and promoting democracy in the United States. That is because at the McCain Institute, inspired by the legacy of the late Senator John McCain and his family, we fight for democracy, human dignity, and security. Our programs to prevent targeted violence and to promote democracy dovetail very closely with ADL's important mission. The work of both of our organizations, as you would imagine, is not only domestic, it's also global. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres stated in a 2021 address to the UN Human Rights Council that, quote, white supremacy and neo-Nazi movements are more than domestic terror threats. Today, these extremist movements represent the #1 internal security threat in several countries. And unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, the United States is one of those countries. The FBI reports that there was a 32% increase in domestic terrorist incidents from 2020 to 2021. And in March 2021, the FBI director gave testimony to the Senate Judiciary Committee where he said, quote, the problem of domestic terrorism has been metastasizing across the country for a long time now, and it's not going away anytime soon. In its October 2020 Homeland Threat Assessment, the Department of Homeland Security predicted that, quote, racially and ethnically motivated violent extremists, specifically white supremacist extremists, will remain the most persistent and lethal threat in the homeland, end quote. Arresting the mobilization from hate to violence requires innovative solutions, collaboration among practitioners, and widespread knowledge sharing. And that's what brings all of us together today. We know the threat we face. It's one we've seen repeatedly throughout history. My parents are Hungarian refugees who fled communist Hungary in 1956. And my family history has shaped my personal worldview. My grandparents in Hungary had many Jewish friends and bore witness to the hate and violence they faced. They resisted as best they could, hiding a few friends and strangers and refusing to join or condone the Hungarian fascists and Nazis. When the war ended, my grandfather served as the transitional head of the Hungarian radio because it was a known fact that he was anti-Nazi and therefore likely to be acceptable to the communists. That lasted a very short while. They fired him once they figured out he wasn't interested in joining the Communist Party. Nevertheless, as you can imagine, I grew up reading books about the Holocaust and Stalin's gulags. The horror that humans could inflict on one another shocked and motivated me actually to study ethnic conflict, to serve in Bosnia as a human rights officer for the Organization on Security and Cooperation in Europe right after the war ended. And frankly, it's also a through line. It's why I joined the McCain Institute almost a year ago. I joined to work with other organizations like ADL and with our government to fight for democracy, to prevent violence, and to advance freedom for all. I bring up my personal legacy and Hungary's experience not randomly. I also would like to draw attention to the hateful anti-Semitic and anti-democratic policies currently espoused by Hungary's government. Prime Minister Viktor Orban stokes anti-Semitism, fascism, and irredentism as a deliberate part of his populist policies. Domestically, he has eroded and attempted to destroy Hungary's liberal democracy. He has forged a partnership with Russian President Vladimir Putin, who I don't need to remind any of you is a genocidal war criminal now indicted and wanted by the International Criminal Court for the abduction and forced deportation of thousands of Ukrainian children. And I'm certain he will face additional indictments. Viktor Orban also has spoken here in the United States and Texas about a year ago, trying to spread his recipe for essentially creating authoritarian governments out of democracies. So unfortunately, despite strides in advancement of human rights and democracy after World War II, the institutions that we established to prevent another global war and to prevent holocausts are currently being challenged today. Vladimir Putin would like to destroy the current international order. He would like to revert back to a sphere of influence system where large states dictate to small states, where major states exist in outright competition, and where economic and military competition frankly lead to war. And he is blatantly violating the Geneva Conventions established to protect civilians and prisoners of war. Russian President Vladimir Putin initiated his government's acts of aggression against Ukraine with the false claim that Russia was actually fighting Nazism in Ukraine, a country led by a Jewish president and prime minister. Of course, it's Putin himself who actually supports neo-Nazis, namely the Russian imperial movement and the Wagner Group, who's been in the headlights for their bloody deeds lately. Putin has also worked, frankly, to build an alliance of authoritarian regimes to operate against the international rule of law and global human rights. Their tactics are age-old, tried and true. They include the use of mis- and disinformation, including stereotypical anti-Semitic tropes and conspiracy theories. And they include promoting violence and scapegoating as a means to achieve and maintain political control. The threat we face today, however, extends beyond Russia's war on Ukraine. It's here, in our backyards, in our schools, in our halls of Congress, among the members of Congress. Just over 3 years ago, on January 6, 2021, with the physical attack on the US Capitol, the United States witnessed an assault on its own democracy, the likes of which we have not seen since our Civil War. The United States is witnessing a sustained spike of hate crime, violence, intolerance, and polarization. As the latest ADL report makes clear, expressions of hatred against Jews have stepped up on both the political left and the right. Our democratic institutions are being tested in every election at all levels of government, from national to local. Conspiracy theories like those of QAnon and global Jewish hegemony are now in common discourse among Americans online and by pundits on television. According to Newsweek polls taken at the end of last year, nearly 40% of Americans still believe that the 2020 election was stolen or rigged. According to the Public Religion Research Institute, nearly 1 in 5 Americans believe in QAnon conspiracy theories. Already this year, at least 385 anti-LGBTQ laws have been introduced at the state level in a majority of U.S. states, according to the ACLU. In findings of the COVID States Project last year, nearly a quarter of Americans say it's sometimes okay to use violence against the government. And 1 in 10 Americans say violence is justified, quote, right now. According to Freedom House, here in America, we are in our 16th consecutive year of international democratic backsliding. Our democracy score fell by 11 points on a 100-point scale in the last decade, from 2010 to 2020. And we're supposed to be the leader among democracies. So what do we do? The first and most vital thing is to continue to increase our support to Ukraine and to prevail upon all other countries, including Israel, to do so as well. If Vladimir Putin is not defeated on the battlefield in Ukraine, his revanchist foreign policy will not die. He will turn next to Moldova, to Georgia, and he will challenge NATO itself, because NATO is the only alliance that will stand up for democracy and human rights, and he knows that. If Putin challenges NATO, of course, then we will end up fighting a global war. So to prevent the spread of war from Ukraine, we must stop Putin in Ukraine. All nations who benefit from the current international order must understand that the human rights of all depend upon our ability to stand up to the autocrats. If Putin is weakened or defeated, the global populist movement will lose steam. President Xi will draw lessons for his own territorial quests, and leaders like Viktor Orban will no longer have powerful friends to offer corrupt support. We must, of course, also confront and face populism and hate here at home. I'm proud to say that we at the McCain Institute and the ADL have been leading the effort on the national stage. We've done some great work together, and this will inform what we do next. And now I want to take a little bit of credit. ADL and the McCain Institute hosted a summit last year with the White House and administration officials on U.S. policy to counter domestic violent extremism. But we didn't just host that event, we actually were integral in the creation of a White House policy adopted in June 2021 to end white supremacist violence in the United States. It was based on a blueprint that the McCain Institute and the Center for American Progress published together, and also reflected many of the priorities identified in ADL's Protect Plan to fight domestic terrorism. ADL also provided the initial support for the McCain Institute's Prevention Practitioners Network in 2020, a one-of-a-kind network of professionals designed to help them pool expertise to address targeted violence, terrorism, and their impacts within the United States. This network that we established has over 1,000 professionals in all 50 states, bringing together leading experts in psychology, psychiatry, social work, law enforcement, community and public safety, justice, and education to develop a community of practice. It did not exist before we created it. And by the way, it's 1,000 practitioners and growing. And it's thanks to ADL because ADL has provided advice to us with this network from its inception and sits on our advisory board. We also have a national campaign that we started last year at the McCain Institute called Screen Hate. This campaign aims to combat the spread of online hate, including anti-Semitism, and provides parents and concerned adults with resources to understand how popular social media platforms work, to explain how young adults are exposed to hate online, and how young adults may be recruited into or find identity with extremist national networks. If you go to screenhate.org, you will see we break down the complex issues of hate, mass violence, and extremism into an easily digestible format. And we cite ADL's essential database of hate symbols, unfortunately used throughout the United States. Our partnership with ADL grows stronger every year because the challenges we face, unfortunately, continue to grow, and because our missions are so closely aligned. Everyone in this room is keenly aware of the work that still needs to be done. Nothing is inevitable, and we cannot take our freedoms for granted. As Senator John McCain put it in his farewell statement before his death, quote, "We are citizens of the world's greatest republic, a nation of ideals, not blood and soil. We are blessed and are a blessing to humanity when we uphold and advance those ideals at home and in the world," end quote. Let's keep doing that, all of us, every day, united as Americans and as humans. Thank you.